for prosecution for leaking the president's FBI files, lying about it, including classified information. They refused to proceed. You have the significant criminal activity by the deputy FBI director referred to the IG, to the Attorney General. They've refused to proceed. I'm hopeful that he tries to get control of the Justice Department. You know, Judicial Watch is facing opposition from the Justice Department and getting accountability, even through the simple FOIA process. It's troubling, and the Attorney General has got to understand it ain't regular business at the Justice Department. This week began with a slap at the Attorney General, an attack on the President through this abusive stone, and it ended, frankly, with another slap and attack at the President and the Attorney General. And if he thinks he's being well served by the careerists around him, he needs to take another look at who's advising him. Because you know the way it works. These folks pretend to be nonpartisan. The Justice Department is full of Democrat activist lawyers pretending to be career civil servants who are pursuing an agenda. There are thousands of Vindmans, thousands of James Comeys, and they're not working for you and I.
There are 110,000 people at the Department of Justice. This is why it's concerning. When former Acting Attorney General Sally Yates signed one of the fraudulent FISA warrants against Carter Page, and now she's writing stuff like this for the Washington Post. Quote, Department of Justice independence is essential to our nation's promise of impartial justice. It's not a tool for POTUS to use for retribution or camouflage, end quote. I mean, this is Sally Yates. She's in a responsible position, but the President of the United States is still the constitutional officer in charge of the executive branch.
Well, it's also the height of irony for her to make that statement when she was involved at the tail end of the Obama administration, heading as a holdover to Trump, kind of approving some of the things that went on and working with Brennan and others in order to get the whole Russia collusion story started. So she's not the right person to be making that statement. But the reality is these people are constitutional officers of the United States. The Attorney General works for the President, and he controls the department. And that's the thing. You look at all these cases, the voters will hold the President and the Attorney General accountable for what happens, as they have every right to be involved at a broad level to make sure things are done appropriately.
Because they can't be out there rogue, and that's why you mentioned Brennan, and I think one of the people that Durham is actually looking at, because it goes above and beyond outside of this, is what Mr. Brennan has said previously. Watch this.
I think it's kind of silly. I'm certainly willing to talk to Mr. Durham or anybody else who has any questions about what we did during this period of time in 2016. And so I don't know what I have not talked to him yet. It clearly, I think, is another indication that Donald Trump is using the Department of Justice to go after his enemies in any way that he can.
I think this guy is scared, and I think there's reason for him to be scared, and I think that this is just my own personal opinion, but part of the reason it transitioned from an investigation to a criminal probe is potentially because of people like Brennan and what they may or may not have done.
Well, I think they're all very nervous about the possibility of prosecutions. I'm not seeing evidence they should be nervous. Durham is doing a glorified IG investigation, and Brennan's kind of right. He's asking questions about his decision-making on how to deploy intelligence assets. He ain't going to be prosecuted over that. He might be criticized in a report. So I'm not seeing indications. You know what a real criminal investigation looks like. I'm not seeing any of that out of this Justice Department on the worst corruption scandal in American history, illegal spying on a sitting president. The president's right to be frustrated. He should be tweeting more and directing the Justice Department more on this. I'd appoint a special counsel directly if I were him. Justice Department is incapable of doing this in these present circumstances.
Well, and I think part of the concern here is that you may not win the case, but at least make the case. And that's been my frustration, is within the Department of Justice, if you see wrongdoing, even when in the Oversight Committee, when I was the chair, we'd make criminal referrals and it would be bipartisan, the Department of Justice still wouldn't go after one of their own. But I got to tell you, I still have my belief level on Attorney General Barr is off the charts. And I do think that these people still have a lot to worry about, because I do believe that Durham is a strong prosecutor and that he will get to the truth. Real quickly, I've only that second
And
left.
just to defend Barr a little bit on the tweeting, I think it doesn't help him when the president tweets about a particular case. I think that hurts him because exactly it sets up the narrative for the left that Barr is doing it at the direction.
And when the president tweets after this recommendation comes out, I think he has every right to do that. And I want a president, when he sees something that is wrong and he thinks it's a miscarriage of justice, to speak out about it. So, gentlemen, thank you. This is not the end of this. There's going to be a lot more about this.
That's right.
All right. The Andy McCabe clip we showed you earlier was actually part 2 of his CNN pity party. Here's what he said earlier in the day.
As glad as I am that the Justice Department and the DC U.S. Attorney's Office finally decided to do the right thing today, it is an absolute disgrace that they took 2 years and put my family through this experience for 2 years before they finally drew the obvious conclusion, and one they could have drawn a long, long time ago.
Here to react is Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA and author of the upcoming book, The MAGA Doctrine, along with Jeffrey Lord, former CNN contributor and a contributing editor at the American Spectator. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Charlie, I want to start with you because when you see Andrew McCabe up there talking all righteously about why this took so long, I mean, he did admit he lied about the lying that he lied. I mean, he's the one that put the country through this, correct?
Well, yeah, and he's trying to say we should feel bad for his family. You know what, Andy McCabe? We should really be feeling bad for Lieutenant General Michael Flynn's family. When you walked into the White House deceivingly and entrapped him under false pretenses, and people forget about this, Andrew McCabe walked into the White House, and the White House was in early stages under complete and total false pretenses, and Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who's a hero to our country, did not have a lawyer present, and that was really the beginning of a lot of this nonsense around Russia, if we think back to that. And now McCabe says, well, you know, my family was put through this. He gave 4 lies to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They say they're misleading statements. They were lies, 3 of which were under oath, and he gets off completely. And I think a lot of Trump supporters and people in the base are just scratching their heads and they're saying, is justice really blind in our country? I mean, or is it more tilted or very tilted in the direction of if you hate this president and say the right things on cable television, all of a sudden you're allowed some sort of soft pardon from the deep state of the DOJ. It's disgusting what happened today.
Well, and you look at what the Inspector General did. He made recommendations to the Department of Justice on the director of the FBI, the deputy director, the director of the FBI, the deputy director of the FBI, the deputy assistant director of the FBI, and nobody's been prosecuted. Let me show you this graphic from the IG's report listing out some things in February of 2018. Misled investigators of the role in news media disclosure. This is about Andrew McCabe. Lacked candor in 4 separate occasions. Authorized media leaks to advance personal interest. And he recommended, the IG recommended the firing of Andrew McCabe. And fortunately, at least that happened. But Jeffrey, this is a person who brought a lot of shame to the Department of Justice.
Yeah, I'll say, I mean, to borrow from Nancy Pelosi, he'll be fired forever for doing what he did. I mean, this is just absolutely disgraceful, Jason. What about sympathy, as Charlie was just saying, for the Flynn family? Frankly, what about for the president and his family? Put through this, and the nation as a whole, put through 3 years of just stuff because they don't like the way the 2016 election came out. This is truly, truly disgraceful. And what you've got, as mentioned earlier, whether it's the Department of Justice or the Department of State or the National Security Council, you have all of these people, or basically liberal elites in the case of the Justice Department, with law degrees, and they weaponize the government, they weaponize the legal process to go after ideological opponents. It's disgraceful.
Now, Jeffrey, I want to continue on with you for just a second here. What do you think of CNN actually giving this continued platform to Andrew McCabe?
Yeah, I think it's a serious mistake. I mean, I just, frankly, since I left, I don't understand. I mean, I understand what they're doing is they've got a bone to pick with the president. They don't like the president. But what they're doing here is hurting their own credibility, their own ratings. They keep going down and down. There's a lot of good people there, but this is self-defeating to the max, and this certainly isn't going to help.
Now, Charlie, part of the huge task that's before, and I worry that the FBI director, Wray, I don't know that he's up to the task of actually reforming an agency that is in such disarray. But how are the American people going to regain confidence that the Department of Justice will act impartially and Lady Justice will have that blindfold on instead of giving a pass every time that their name is Clinton or they have a Democrat or a big D next to their name?
She doesn't have the blindfold on. She has her left eye open, and she's definitely favoring everyone who's on the political left today. And to kind of expound on the point earlier, let's just not forget, Andrew McCabe came out and did a full media blitz just about a year ago to try to keep this Russia narrative going. Remember, he tried to convince the talking class and the intelligentsia of the wise men of Washington on the left to continue to push forward when it's starting to come out that Mueller maybe wasn't going to come out with that big bombshell. He said, oh, no, we really had on good evidence that the president was doing something very questionable at the highest levels. What about the president's family? Great point, Jeffrey. What about everybody around the president's orbit that have suffered because of this? And if he wants to have this cable news pity party for him, maybe he shouldn't have lied under oath. Maybe he shouldn't have leaked this information. And he was part of this deep state collusion against the president to illegally spy on the president, to leak the information. And boy, I sure hope that at some point justice will be held up, because if not, I'm telling you, the grassroots of this country and middle America, we are fed up with the ruling class being able to do whatever they want to do when they don't like a president and get away with it. People have to start being held accountable for it.
Yeah, can you imagine if Hillary Clinton was elected the president? These people like McCabe and Comey and others would be at the helm of the largest law enforcement operation in the country. Thank goodness that didn't happen, and that there is some cleansing. I'd like to see some people prosecuted, but I'm glad that every top tier there at the FBI is on their way out. But I got to tell you, between Barr and Wray, they have got a long way to go to get us some confidence that it will be equal and that they will at least prosecute. Even if they lose a case, at least try to prosecute it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight. Happy Valentine's Day. Well, coming up, another bombshell today. On the heels of the request to reduce Roger Stone's sentence, the Department of Justice is taking another look at the case against Michael Flynn. Are all the Mueller conspiracies unraveling before our very eyes? Plus, making the McCabe news all the more enraging, Lee Smith breaks down a damning new report of wrongdoing at the FBI. Don't move. The Department of Justice was on a roll this week, and it's not over yet. Attorney General Bill Barr is bringing in an outsider, a prosecutor, to review the department's case against Michael Flynn, Trump's former national security advisor. For more, we go live to Fox News correspondent Leland Vitter with the latest. Leland.
Hey, Jason, this is a review of the case against Michael Flynn, so it could lead to anything or any decision by the DOJ. It's going to be led by a different U.S. attorney, in this case a man from Missouri, to examine the case and the decisions surrounding the prosecution of Flynn for lying to the FBI. The former national security advisor, Trump supporter, and three-star general pled guilty to lying to investigators about his contacts with the Russian ambassador. Flynn was long seen as a proponent of better relationships with Moscow, and his supporters say he's been railroaded and bullied into pleading guilty. Last month, his lawyer issued a blistering statement tying the withdrawal of his plea guilty, saying the prosecution has shown abject bad faith and pure retaliation against Mr. Flynn. Since he retained new counsel, this can only be because with new unconflicted counsel, Mr. Flynn refused to lie for the prosecution. Justice is not a game, and there should be no room for such gamesmanship in the Department of Justice. That move came after prosecutors alleged Flynn wasn't living up to his end of the deal to cooperate with the government. So now comes this review. Jason, as you just pointed out, nothing here in D.C. happens as a vacuum. As you well know, rarely has the DOJ been under more scrutiny than it is at the end of this week, which happens to mark the one-year anniversary of Bill Barr's tenure as Attorney General.
Leland, thank you very much. Well, despite all the evidence pointing to prosecutorial misconduct in the Flynn case, CNN's legal luminary Jeffrey Toobin said this.
This is not some 16-year-old kid railroaded by a judicial system that he has no support in. This is a guilty plea by an extremely knowledgeable, educated person, advised by the best lawyers in the country, and this is what the Department of Justice is investigating. The only reason they are investigating it is because Donald Trump didn't like the result.
Now think hard. If Trump was truly pulling the strings, Bill Barr wouldn't have dropped the case against McCabe. Well, joining me now is former Department of Justice prosecutor Jim Trusty. Jim, thank you so much for joining us here tonight.
Sure.
Tell me about the significance of bringing in a prosecutor for this review to the Department of Justice to look at this case.
Well, let me put it this way. You know, if you asked me a month ago whether a motion to withdraw a guilty plea had any legs, I would say it's going to probably fail. It's usually about 90% or more of these motions to withdraw from a guilty plea turn into a disaster for the defendant. They lose cooperation, they lose acceptance of responsibility, and the judge says, no, I did it right when I had those questions for you about your guilty plea. So it's a very personal exercise for the judge. It's starting to turn into a different kind of beast right now. I mean, it's interesting. We don't know where it's going to end up, but Judge Sullivan seems to be tolerating a lot of extra litigation on this, a lot of change. This new attorney coming in to basically assess the whole situation, it all rings familiar from Ted Stevens. You know, that was Judge Sullivan also.
Right.
He appointed an independent counsel, and you have the same flavor going on now, that there might be a real hard look at the conduct that built up to this plea rather than the moment of the plea itself.
Well, Sidney Powell is the new, fairly new attorney representing the general. She's very savvy. She has a lot of competency, and she obviously does have the ear of the judge, who is, I think, giving a lot of latitude, because this case could have easily been wrapped up some time ago. But what does this really say about the Department of Justice? Because on the one hand, the left is saying, oh, this is Trump's thumbprints all over it. I tell you, my experience is the president is about as hands-off as he can possibly be. Yeah, he tweets about some stuff, but in terms of actually calling and pushing the Department of Justice, I don't see it.
No, I think this is really coming from Barr. You know, you got to remember, Barr came into this as a guy who didn't need this job. He's established his credentials. I think he has a lot of gravitas, a lot of integrity. I think he comes at all of these as case-by-case determinations of what's fair and what's right. And he might have a little bit of buyer's remorse looking back at some of the Mueller probe prosecutions. And really, I think the open question, which is not one that exonerates so much, but compares. It says, look, maybe it's okay to go after Michael Flynn. Maybe there's a false statement here, but why did that happen in any of the Hillary probe? So, you know, the discretion that's being used by FBI and prosecutors is probably alarming an old hand like Bill Barr when he sees the possible dire consequences like Roger Stone or even in Flynn's case.
One other thing that you and I were talking before this, there is House Resolution 202. This is an important part. Most people don't realize this, but the only of the 2+ million federal employees that have an exemption from being investigated by the Inspector General, attorneys at the Department of Justice. This bill from Cedric Richmond, a Democrat from Louisiana, Jody Hice, a Republican, it passed unanimously out of the House, and I do hope the Senate takes this up, because the IG should be able to look at these individual attorneys at the Department of Justice as well. So thank you so much for joining here.
All right, good to see you.
That's one of the benefits of getting to be the host, bring those things up.
The FBI is an honest, apolitical organization, and I hope people will stare at that and learn about what the FBI is like. Human and flawed, but deeply committed to trying to do the right thing.
I think people can have some assurance that the FBI actually, by and large, went about doing a pretty responsible job.
Pretty responsible. A new report from Real Clear Investigations suggests otherwise. The outlet unearthed a bombshell buried deep in the IG report on FISA abuse released last year. Inspector General Michael Horowitz discovered that FBI officials shared highly classified materials with former British spy Christopher Steele. As if that wasn't bad enough, the agents knew Steele was doing opposition research against Trump, and were told that Hillary Clinton herself knew about it. Here now is Lee Smith, investigative journalist and author of The Plot Against the President. So why in the world would they be taking classified information and sharing that with Steele?
Right. First of all, I want to say it's a terrific piece by a colleague, Eric Felton. It's a very important piece. It gets to a lot of important issues. One of the main problem that comes out is that they're sharing classified information with Steele. One of the other things that's illuminated in the story is that after Steele gets this information from the FBI team, he goes and meets with Glenn Simpson.